Her other books include The Passover Haggadah, a biography, Princeton University Press, 2020, Sarah Laughed, The Jewish Dream Book, Words on Fire, and Safe and Sound. For her writing, she was awarded a Creative Writing Fellowship by the National Endowment for the Arts. Dr. Ochs earned her BA in Drama and French from Tufts University, an MFA in Theater from Sarah Lawrence College, and a PhD in Anthropology of Religion from Drew University. She was ordained as a rabbi in 2012. Again, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. Hello to all of my Princeton friends, and hello to my friends and family in distant places. It's really good to see you all and to be together. I was supposed to come to Princeton back last March to speak about my new book, the Passover Haggadah, a biography. And because of the pandemic, wasn't able to do so, and ended up giving a talk on Zoom through with my friends on Jewish Live, which is a wonderful resource for Jewish digital, all things Jewish digital. So I missed that trip to Princeton. So this is my trip to Princeton now. I'm trying to just get back to seeing everybody. Let's see if I can get out of the spotlight. Well, I know you're there. I had thought that my study of New Jewish ritual had more or less come to a conclusion when I published my book on inventing Jewish ritual. After that, same-sex weddings really began to take off once they were legal and in America and accepted in the Jewish community. So I wrote some more on same-sex weddings. And then I thought, well, I guess my studies of New Jewish ritual, I guess they've come to a close. Although I was paying attention to New Haggadot, but that was something that had started long ago. As soon as the pandemic struck and we began to organize our Jewish lives in relationship to it, I realized that we were entering a new phase of Jewish ritualizing. I had no idea how rich a phase it was going to be. And I'm hoping what we can do tonight is to begin to go take a few steps back and chronicle how we got to where we are now, possibly envisioning how some of the new ritual creativity might even continue into the future. And I'm hopeful during our conversation at the end of my speaking that people will be able to speak personally about Jewish rituals that they've participated in that have been new, different, rich, disconcerting, but then oddly meaningful and oddly satisfying, and rituals that at first seemed to be a little bit transgressive because they involve the use of technology, eventually became holy rituals. And a new term came into my mind today as I was scheduling with my Charlottesville community a meeting to talk about the high holidays, the high holy holidays, as we sometimes call them. Is that the high holy days? It's a funny term. And I was thinking about another term that we use, which is high tech. Now, I'm not so sure what the difference between high tech and low tech is, but I know that in the past weeks, we are beginning as a Jewish community to establish a high holy technology, that our technologies are being used in new holy ways, wholly different in some ways and also wholly the same, but wholly nonetheless. So you might ask, what is a ritual? A ritual is a practice that is invented, a created practice that people do. We know that children have bedtime rituals, probably animals have their own rituals as well. We won't go there tonight. But these are practices that usually involve speech, sometimes song, sometimes movement, sometimes a food, a gesture. Most rituals, not all, but most rituals involve a coming together of people, or at least other people practice the same ritual that you're doing, if it's a religious ritual and not a personal ritual. And most rituals are quite simple. Take the birthday. You need a cookie or a cake, a cupcake. You stick a candle in it. You sing. Poof, you've had a birthday celebration. You take a challah, some nice bread, a candle, a tablecloth, a napkin on top of the challah. Poof, you've got a Shabbat ritual. Rituals are generally not all that complex. Some are. The Passover ritual is a highly complex ritual, but oddly enough, it's a ritual that Joe and Jane Jew are expected, Moshe and Malka Jew, are expected to be able to pull off in their own homes each year with a book of instruction. John, I'm going to ask you if you can show the first screen. The first image, please. We're almost there. There we go. This image was created by a student of mine named Rachel Wallet. She was a student in my class on the Passover Haggadah. It was a service learning course, and all the students were volunteering. And this was done in one of the last classes that we had at the University of Virginia on March 6th. I believe it was around March 6th. And the assignment was to take an image from an historical Haggadah, and she chose the medieval Bird's Head Haggadah, and relate it to something in our own times. And this, from Rachel's perspective, was totally imaginative because American Jews, and she's depicting some American Jews, were not yet wearing masks. We didn't even own masks, most of us. I certainly didn't own a mask. We didn't own black masks if we had them. And she is creating a scene in which a family, I guess it's a family because some of the people are short, a family is creating they're creating the matzah the way that the bird's head figures are creating matzah outside their house. And it looks like in the middle there may be a Seder plate as well that they're creating. And I think this was a premonition kind of image. This image that something was scary, something was out there, our lives would change in some ways. But at that point, we hardly had any idea that the students would not be coming back from spring break. But there's this sense that Jewish life would respond, would change in ways that we didn't yet know. If we can see the next image, please. Now, this doesn't look terribly high tech. In fact, this is a slightly high tech in that it's an image of either my challah or one of my daughter's chalot or a challah of one of my students. Early on, once we were all at home, we began to think about neediness, that we needed bread, but where was it going to come from? And some of us began to make our own chalot. And we would often share our handiwork because we were so impressed with ourselves. We would share it with our friends and family online. at this very time, a new ritual developed in my family, which was that each morning at, I forget how we started, if it was 8 or 9 o'clock, each morning my uncles and my cousins got together for morning davening. These were all of my Orthodox relatives, and I don't generally pray Orthodox style. Our styles are different in various respects. But when I got an invitation from one of my cousins to join in, I was so thrilled to be able to see each other, to be together. It was our way of coming together, and it was a way that I could see that everybody was okay. And here we are. Oh, we'll just go back to that that image, if you don't mind, of the computer screen.
Sorry. Yeah, one moment. Sorry about that. Bear with me. You want?
John, bringing up an image of a family, something that you can easily imagine. It's all members, many members of a particular family coming together on Zoom. And initially, in addition to our morning services, we also had, we tried one week to have an all-family Kabbalat Shabbat with special rules in place so no one would transgress the Sabbath. So one of our uncles out in Santa Fe lit the candles, but he didn't say a blessing. Our Haredi relatives in Baltimore were there. Reform relatives around the country, conservative, Reconstructionists. We were all there, and we quickly realized that night that you cannot sing together on Zoom. It just did not work. And I think this was a time when we were sharing halot and we were having these family Zoom sessions. It was a time when we were realizing that we were lonely doing our Judaism, and that being Jewish, doing Jewish was a communal project, and that we needed community to feel whole, to feel coherent, to feel that we were in a familiar Jewish space.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Is everybody else hearing interference? If you are, thumbs up. Yeah, your sound is not clear, and I don't know why. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I'm going to mute everybody. Now, Vanessa, if you could unmute yourself again and try again, let's see what happens.
Is this working now?
No.
Not working now.
How about when I speak? Does that sound clear, folks?
It sounds clear.
Uh-oh.
How is this? Is this any better?
No.
I'm going to try going in a different room.
I'm wondering if the external mic in some way, it sounds like a wire is out a little bit, you know? Like when an adapter is slightly out and it's not fully connected.
I'm not using an external mic.
Okay.
Let me try this. Is this any better? Does the sound better now?
No. No, I think it's in your computer. Do you have
it started just after Jonathan started screen sharing the last thing, I think, the computer family.
Try a different computer.
Yeah, but I stopped that screen share.
I know, but maybe something, Vanessa did something at the same time that I was suggesting.
There we go. I'm going to try being
Better.
Okay, I'm going to try being Peter Ochs now. How's that?
That's fine.
Yes, I think you're better
Is that
now.
better?
Yes.
Okay, and now Peter is walking off as me.
Yes, great. Okay.
Okay.
Can
There we go.
everybody?
Sorry for that glitch.
No problem. Can you all mute yourselves and then,
So if you can just focus on Peter Ochs as the speaker, okay? How's that? Are we working now? Okay, very good. Okay, so I will continue. We realized that those family services were not necessarily fulfilling the needs that we were looking for, but it did allow us to feel a certain amount of connection. Soon Passover was coming, and we'll move down to the fourth image, John, if you don't mind. We'll go down to the fourth image. There we go. So Passover was coming, and I believe many of us who didn't have access to grocery stores were feeling very anxious about how we would pull together the many parts of the Seder. I was very anxious about my shank bone, because not that I was going to find a shank bone, but because I wasn't even going to find a beet. So I found a stuffed lamb that I could potentially use. And in terms of proper greens, we didn't have any. So I went out in the backyard and I started foraging. We can go to the next slide, please. Quickly enough, and this astonished me, Jews around the world began to envision what a virtual Seder would be like. Online, created by synagogues, created by various Jewish communal organizations and foundations. There were virtual Haggadot that were created. And at this time, many people who were working at home were using Zoom and were learning how to use the technology, not necessarily gracefully. And as we see tonight, we're still a work in progress. But we were learning how to use the technology. And I would say that the first virtual Seder that we held was, at least for my family, quite beautiful. And if you think back, if you had a virtual Seder, yes, it was terribly lonely that there may have only been two of you or one of you there. And it was lonely to create our own food without family helping prepare together. However, once we sat down and we put together whatever we had, we could ask and answer a new set of 4 questions of how was this night different from all other nights. And when we answered it, when we asked and we answered, we had very important and personal, exceedingly personal conversations that we wanted to share with others. And certainly when we got to Dayenu, and we talked about the steps of our gratitude, what did we have now? At least that we were in a warm house, that we were for the time being well, that we could connect with our family online. These were real feelings of gratitude. And I remember the night of that first night of the Seder, one of my kinswomen, who I don't know, I've known her for years and years, but I didn't know her all that well. She began to share her sense of gratitude for healthcare professionals. And she began to cry, and we began to cry. And I felt this sense of the power of the Dayenu ritual that I had never until that moment felt, that sense of astonishing gratitude. And it didn't matter that she was far away. And it didn't matter that we were all little Brady Bunch faces inside a screen. We were all together. And when she cried, we cried together. We held each other in cyberspace. And again, I did not know that that was possible, to have that kind of emotional connection through a machine. The second night of Passover, I'll be honest with you, when we had a Zoom Seder, I felt a lot of sadness. It was with just my family, and I was my close family, and I was just yearning to be with them, to touch them, to hug them. And on that night, the technology just didn't fill the need I had hoped it could fill. If we can look at the next slide, please. And I think that's it. So now we're back to each other.
Yeah, I think that's the last one.
Good. Okay, so now I can continue with that without images. Around that time, my dear colleague Michelle Kislyak, who may even be here with us tonight, lost one parent, and then she lost a second parent. And in both instances, she couldn't be there. She couldn't be there to mourn. She couldn't be there for the funeral. She couldn't be there for the Shiva with her sister. And yet, online, there was every morning, every evening, there was a virtual Shiva that we could be at. And I kept thinking about how incredibly sad it was to have this loss, to be so far away. And at the same time, I felt that I was glimpsing at the Shiva. I was hanging out for a time in the Shiva house. I felt that many of the needs of a Shiva ritual were actually being fulfilled. Not just the fact that we were praying together and that the mourners could say Kaddish together, but also that the central mourners could tell stories. And they could even contradict each other. No, it wasn't like that. No, I remembered it differently. And it was like a real Shiva house, which was quite beautiful. Our synagogue, my synagogue, does not have a high-tech expert. One of the members of our synagogue administration did come forward and showed us what technological skills he's had, but we didn't begin in a high-tech way. And so we slowly entered into the world of Zooming. And at first, my first Shabbat or two, when there were Zoom possibilities, I will confess, I had these mixed feelings. What was I supposed to do on Shabbat? Was I supposed to Zoom with my community? Was I supposed to even go online? Was that, I mean, I knew I could as a conservative Jew. The rabbis were saying this was okay to do. You could even count as a minyan. You could say Kaddish together. You could say Kedusha together. Even though this was possible, I thought, oh, all week long, I'm on the computer. I don't want to be on the computer on Shabbat. Then I thought, gee, I wonder what's happening in New York City. Like, I'll just mosey on for a minute over to the Park Avenue Synagogue. Oh, I'll just mosey over to the Central Synagogue. And while I'm at it a few hours later, I'll check out what's happening in California. I was shul hopping to beat the band, feeling very uncomfortable about it, but also very curious to see how were people managing to create prayerful spaces. And my friends who are Chazanim, and the Chazanim have had beautiful discussions on one Zoom group. Your past cantor Joanna Dalkin, she and others were talking about how even when you are on Zoom, it's possible in Jewish community to have an experience of prayer that's intimate and compelling and intense. And I was watching that happen in different communities. Eventually, I went back to my own community because then I could see Mel and Phyllis and Tom and Rachel and Marcia and Sandy. I could see all of my peeps and know that they were well. There were elements of the service that made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't like being put in a chat room where I had to chit-chat with people. Like generally in synagogue, I like to choose who I chit-chat with. And I was uncomfortable as well during Torah study, where I was put in a group where I had to have chavruta study. I prefer to do my study on my own. It's just my taste. So I found that the technology was putting me sometimes in places that was not all that comfortable for me. And eventually I would get used to these new modes of being. What was truly sensational, and perhaps you've had this experience, was the online bar or bat mitzvah. In Charlottesville, in the Charlottesville and Congregation Beth Israel, we've had several of these. And after a while, we invented it in the same way that every other synagogue was inventing the very same thing. But as we were inventing it, it quickly became minhag. It quickly became tradition. And what we would see is the rabbi or the rabbis would begin a morning service. And then we would we would focus over to the family of the bat mitzvah. And I'm sure they were using a tripod or a propped up iPad, or they figured out their technology in advance. And they were at a table on their deck, or they were at the dining room table inside, or some people had a kitchen table. And we could see the bat mitzvah girl wearing her talit, bat mitzvah woman wearing her talit, flanked by her parents, and maybe there was a little sibling in the background. And in the little boxes, in the little Brady Bunch boxes, we could see members of the family, members of the community, sometimes this past week, as far as France and Italy, and even family members who were driving in their car. So we were seeing people all over the place. The young woman gave her Dvar Torah, and at the right moment, the rabbi invited her to say the bracha before the Torah reading. And together with her mother and father, they uncovered the Torah, and she, with her yad, read from it. At the end of one of these services, Rabbi Rachel Schmelkin, one of the beloved rabbis in my community, said, we need to pay attention to this. This is an incredible moment in Jewish life, in that here we see a Jewish family owning their Judaism. And I think many of us have to ask ourselves, what would we do if we had a Torah on our dining room table? Would we know how to open it? Would we know how to find the place? And these were not the families that had been practicing this all year long and rehearsing this all year long. The rabbi had delivered a Torah to their house and masked, went over how do you find the right place. For one family, the rabbi even took an image of the yad on the right place on the text so that the bat mitzvah girl could find it. This was an astonishing thing of what had this new technology allowed us to do, to have a sense of ownership. Of course, yes, we want to be back together eventually in a synagogue, because Judaism is, as we know it, is communal, involves touch, hearing each other, feeling each other, creating that sense of what anthropologists Victor and Edith Turner called communitas, that sense of effervescence in a community, that sense of being together and transcending the here and now, and entering into a spiritual place, feeling divinity, which is very hard to do alone, not impossible, but harder to do alone. Yes, we eventually wish to have that, but at this time, it is astonishing to me how much holiness we are able to create through the technology. Now, I've been speaking about prayerful practice primarily, but I think the real place of extraordinary growth in Jewish communities worldwide has been in Talmud Torah, in learning. If you go on Jewish Live, if you go on Hadar, if you go on Romamu, if you go probably on the Princeton Jewish Center list on what's happening now and resources, you can find Torah study opportunities around the country, around the clock. You can study with anyone you wish. You can sing with Joey Weisberg. You can sing with Shir Yaakov. Fine, you can sing along with Ozzy Schwartz. You can learn songs. You can learn how to bake a challah. And of course, you can also study the Parsha. You can study Musar. You can study, if you're a kid, you can join in with Hadar and study Mishnah several times a week. And I think it's called Mishnah Club or Mishnah Camp. And Jewish camps right now are creating opportunities for song and dance and meditation. Right now, the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, I believe, several times a week, has opportunities for Jewish meditation, led meditation, and also twice a week for Jewish yoga. I am there for those twice a week Jewish yoga sessions. Thank you, Institute for Jewish Spirituality. So a day can happen, and in the morning I'm davening with my uncles and my cousins. Later in the day, I am doing Jewish yoga. I am doing a Torah study, and then I'm in the middle, I'm trying to keep my house clean and bake bread and figure out where food is going to come from, and also do my work. And also do my day job as a professor and as a writer and as a researcher. Why are we doing all of this? I think it's not just because our Judaism is important to us, and it is. I think we are engaging with the technology with this voracious hunger and with this extreme creativity, because this is a fearful time. It's a terrifying time. We are ourselves feeling vulnerable, or we are feeling the vulnerability of members of our family. We're certainly feeling the vulnerability of the world. And in the last weeks, we're also understanding how issues of race makes African Americans, how it makes Black lives all the more vulnerable. It's a terrifying time. We don't feel necessarily all that empowered if we're not scientists. We can take care of ourselves, we can be safe, we can care for others, we can go to protests, we can fund the right causes, but in ways that we've never known before, I think we feel more frightened and more powerless. I certainly know that when I open my Siddur, I read prayers in fully new ways. Re'ena be'enenu, b'riva rivenu. This is in the morning prayers. Behold our affliction and deliver us. Redeem us soon because of your mercy. I say that a lot. I've said that prayer so many times, but I can't say that ever before this period. I've actually thought, behold our affliction. It's like, God, pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening to everybody and deliver us. And I confess, in my weaker moment of prayers, I think, and I hope Whole Foods will have delivery too. And they did. But I think this is a time in which we have real fears and real needs, and we are realizing that just as creative as the rabbis were after the destruction of Temple Judaism, as rabbinic Judaism was being created, and a whole new way of being Jewish was invented, moving from temple offerings of Paschal offerings at a temple, and the Levites singing praises, moving to having a shank bone at your table and singing psalms with your family. How did that Passover Seder seem real enough? How did it seem a source of connecting those Jews to God? And it did become really real. And I think I'm probably sounding a little bit like the Velveteen Rabbit, not the Velveteen Rabbi, the Velveteen Rabbit right now. But these the Judaism that's being created through the mediation of high technology is really real. And it's new. And yes, it's also very old, but it does incorporate that possibility of invention with a whole heart and a learned heart, and also inventing in a forgiving manner, knowing that things that we do once or twice or 3 times even that don't feel quite right, they don't have to become minhag. They don't have to become what we do. We can try again. We can invent more expansively. And I know many folks right now are sitting with their communities thinking, well, what do we do for Rosh Hashanah? Do we open up our synagogues? Do we take a risk? And we've been thinking about new rituals in terms of some of our deepest Jewish values, our Jewish sensibilities, such as pikuach nefesh. Do we come together and pray as a huge community on Rosh Hashanah if we're going to be endangering people's lives, if we're going to be making the elders who can't be there, those with high risk health situations, if they can't be there, will it make them feel very sad if the whole community is together and there isn't an online option for everybody? So we're at this place right now of thinking, can our Rosh Hashanah be as creative, not just as our Pesach, but our Shavuot was amazingly creative. You could start out doing Tikkun Leil Shavuot, the all-night Shavuot study on the East Coast. You could move to the middle of the country. You could move to the West Coast. I spent hours learning with all these cool people and doing a little bit of Torah yoga and meditation and some music as well. It was one of the richest nights of Shavuot I had ever experienced. And initially I thought, I'm not going online for Shavuot. I'm just going to sit and study. I'll have blintzes with my husband. I'll go online. We'll compare different blintzes with my daughters and their families, and then we'll move on. But I got lonely in the night for other Jews, and I got lonely for learning together. And I found not only that connection, but I found hours and hours of really deep Torah study. So I think we're onto something right now. And as scary as it is outside, I think this is a moment of Jewish celebration to know that we in this period are finding great resources from our tradition, resources from the technology. We're looking at what other people are doing in different communities, religious communities and social and educational communities, and we're all learning from each other. We're learning a great deal from each other, and we're sharing. And right now, I would love to be able to share with you and hear your questions and hear your observations about this new period of ritual innovation, ritual expansion, and perhaps some folks will be able to speak about new Jewish rituals that you've been part of that have felt in some ways not the real thing, but in other ways have had compelling aspects to them. An example would be when you go to a Zoom service, now a rabbi can say, if you would like me to say a Misha Berach for someone that you care about, a prayer of healing for someone that you're caring about, put their name in the chat room. Well, that feels right. If you're comfortable typing on Shabbat, to put that name in the chat room feels very satisfying. Or if you're mourning the loss or remembering someone before Kaddish, to put your name down, that feels really quite satisfying. Our rabbi now even has a standard phrase. He says, at this point in the service, I invite you to unmute yourselves so that you can say an amen, you can say a response to the Kaddish of the people in the community, because they need to hear your response. So we're developing all kinds of novelties, and I would love to hear the novelties that you are experiencing and questions as well.
So Betty Ross sent a chat. Betty, do you want to unmute yourself and speak? Betty, are you there? Okay, let me read the chat she sent. It says, my rabbi feels that Zoom shivas.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
is that you, Betty?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I couldn't unmute it at first. Sorry.
Good.
What I wrote was, in many ways, the Shiva on Zoom, my rabbi feels it better in a one way because people are talking about the person that's deceased. They're talking about the family. They're all on the same page, as opposed to when you go to a Shiva house, and people are chit-chatting, all different groups, and not necessarily about, the reason that they're there. So it's much more attentive to the family that has had the loss, and I agree with her.
And I would agree with you too, Betty, that, so often when we go to a Shiva, there's food, there's drink, there's gossip, and that's not why you're there. But it's very hard to find a way to get close enough to the mourners to be able to speak with them. You're not quite sure what to say, and the Zoom Shiva allows a traditional Shiva practice, which is for the mourners to be the ones to control the conversation.
Thank you.
We
Thank
have
you.
Claudette Beta Haron. Can you unmute yourself and speak, please?
Yes, I didn't know if you were going to see my raised hand. I'm Michelle
Hi,
Kislyak.
Claudette.
Hi. And I felt that having a Zoom Shiva was better than nothing, but I can't say that it was maybe 10% of what I would have gotten out of a Shiva with my community. I belong to the Newton Center Minyan, and I've made hundreds of Shiva calls probably over the last 20 years that I've been a member there. And the only time there's food is first thing in the morning, because sometimes people have to grab a bagel on their way out the door to get to work. But it is not a schmooze fest. It's definitely focused on the mourners and discussing the deceased and pictures of the deceased and copies of the eulogy for those who weren't at the funeral. And it's a very, very meaningful and comforting thing. And I felt bereft of my parents, bereft of my sister, and bereft of my community.
Yes.
The things that comforted me the most were when neighbors came by and stood outside and knocked on the storm window and gave me a virtual hug, or they stood out on the sidewalk and I opened the door and spoke to them from the doorway. But it was I don't have anything to compare it to because I haven't had a regular Shiva, and it was very, very hard.
I can hardly imagine, Claudette. First of all, may the memory of your father be for a blessing, and may the memory of your mother be for a blessing. And my heart really then and still goes out to you and Michelle, that in your families, that you couldn't experience the kind of comfort of your community. I think, and that was very early. This experience that you had was quite early on in the pandemic, and I think at that point, I think there was we had fewer resources than we do right now. But I want to assure you that I don't think that when it comes to Shiva, and I don't think when it comes to synagogue prayer services, I don't think that what we are creating right now in the land of high tech will compensate at all or will be the chosen alternative to practice that we do have. However, I think we are learning that if you have a relative who is in Albuquerque and can't make it to the Shiva or couldn't make it to the funeral, that I think we're discovering that there are ways that a distant person can either pay a Shiva call or perform Bikur Cholim, visiting the ill. And certainly my rabbi friends who are chaplains, they're doing a lot of their chaplaining online. So I don't think that the high-tech versions can be substitutes, but I think we will find, and to answer the question of what will remain in the future, I think we are going to find that there are ways to compensate for loss, for ways to compensate for distance or people's inability to travel. Thanks, Claudette.
Having them zoom in, you mean?
Yes, having them zoom in or whatever new, we will look back one day and smile about the Zoom technology that we once had. It'll be like, it'll be so ancient and quaint.
And awful because you can't sing together.
Yes.
That's,
Thanks, Claudette.
I think that would be important.
Okay, Moshe Margolin, you got a question, a comment? You're on mute, Moshe.
Okay.
Hi, Moshe.
Hi, how are you?
How are you?
You're even better in person than knowing you from email. Anyway, this is marvelous. I find myself crying. It's really something. I wanted to talk about Shiva because unfortunately my wife Judy and I had to go to several. Some COVID related, in fact, mostly COVID related, of aging
So
parents.
sorry.
Yeah, but I want to say something about the process. Number one, when you go to a Shiva and you don't go to the funeral, it's hard to get a sense who the person was and how they impacted the family. And in the Shivot that we went to, we heard tremendous eulogies that obviously people took a relatively long time to write. They also did a photo array in several of them. And that gives you a sense of who the person was and the history and the old black and white photos and all that. But more importantly, and I thought about this, it helps the grieving family. Why? Because they're telling a story that they have to prepare to share with their friends. And I think that in a sense is very powerful. And it's also a way of consoling your friends. Usually at the end, people can say what they want. And I was at a Shiva, my wife and I, about a week and a half ago, and I just said something off the cuff, and I don't even remember what I said, to tell you the truth. And that happens a lot. But my wife spoke to her friend who said she was incredibly moved. Mm-hmm. And it's really a way to communicate. Now, you know what? I find a lot of positive in this, right? And also the number of people that participate. I remember at the Shivot, unfortunately, at our house, there were 20, 30 people. We were at Shivot where there was 160, 150 from all over the country, from all over the world. And if that doesn't give you a sense of warmth and being engulfed, I just don't know what does.
Thank you so much, Moshe, for what you shared. You do remind me of something, just you sparked an idea, which is that often when we go to a Shiva, we're worried about what should we say. because not all of us come up with the great things to say. And when I'm advising people, young people, about what should they do when they go to a shiva, I said the most important thing is that you go there and you listen, and that you just be present. And I think that's something that we're going to be investigating as we continue to have more virtual Jewish life, is can presence, can listening, can it happen virtually the way it happens in real life? Can we have an I-thou relationship, to use Buber's term? Can we have that connection on a screen? And I initially thought, no, it's not possible. But I suspect as we learn to use our machinery better and stare not at the screen, but at the camera. Moshe, do me something. Do you know where your camera is right now? Is it above your head? No. I have a feeling that we are eventually going to figure out how we can use Zoom so that our eyes actually meet, or there'll be some sort of Apple will come up with an eye-meeting technology. And I think that will allow us to feel a deeper kind of connection when we're not together. Thank you.
Okay, Susan Resnick, can you unmute yourself, please, and speak?
First of all, Dr. Ochs, thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. I want to turn our attention to the high holidays. There have been a lot of proposals of late about having the creation of a Rosh Hashanah and of a high holiday Haggadah. There have been talks about creating mini binyanim from this around, from this in communities. But my question is, how much of this work for a holiday where it's really about being together, how much of the work needs to be done by individuals on behalf of their smaller chavarot or whatever, and how much should be done by the synagogues? And are the synagogues wedded to the idea of we're going to have the same old service and the same old, and they're missing the opportunity that this pandemic has brought for us to be creative and doing different kinds of ritual? So I'd like to hear some, not only from you, but from others about that. Thank you.
Right, I think that's a great question. I think this upcoming Rosh Hashanah is allowing many Jewish creative types, rabbis, educators, Chavurah members, people in federations, in foundations, Jewish foundations, to go to a restart button when it comes to a refresh restart button when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, asking, what are we there to do? What is the work that needs to be done? And if it is self-examination and tshuva, do we need to be sitting in a room with 1,000 people saying the same prayers that we normally would say? Do we need it, and can we have this powerful experience of tshuva if we just show up on that day? Are there going to be practices that we engage in slowly, individually, in small communities, in our pods beforehand? Will practices take place in small outdoor groups? Will they take place in several families? I think absolutely everything that you're saying, Susan, sounds like what many Jewish communities are talking about right now. I think a real question is, does everybody have to invent this in their own community? How can we pool resources at a time when when many Jewish organizations are really strapped for funding? Do we need everybody inventing their own virtual Haggadah, their own virtual Rosh Hashanah Haggadah? Or do we want to have broad collaborations, the kinds of collaborations that the technology allows? On Shavuot, there were all of the Jewish Emergent Network communities, the Lab Shul, Kavanah, Ikar, and others, they came together and collaborated on those on their learning. They pooled their resources, and I think that's something that there's this push-pull. Do we want to see our own local folks in the boxes, or are we willing to be part of Klal Yisrael, to be with new Jewish friends? Thank you, Susan.
Okay, there's a chat from Cheryl Beckerman. Would you like to unmute yourself and speak it, or do you want me to read it?
I'll speak. Chaya Beckerman to.
Hi, Chaya.
Bruno. Hi. Before I get to what I put into the chat, I just want to express my thanks for the conversation that just happened about the high holidays. You know, I eavesdropped on my husband's board of rabbi meeting via Zoom when they were talking. This is for Orange County in California, and they were talking about how to collaborate for the high holidays. And, you know, I think in terms of what you were saying about, do we want to be in our own community or branch out? You know, I think there's going to be a level of, yeah, it's a good compromise to be collaborating within a larger community, but still one where there'll be a lot of familiar faces. I think people in different parts of Orange County still know who the rabbis are in others, and that will work, except for us because we have live stream, not Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm getting ideas just listening about we could pre-record the choir, we could pre-record shofar, somehow use some of that. Now getting to what I had written, I said I'm loving being able to shul hop.
Mm-hmm.
But I prefer live stream services to Facebook Live, which is how some of the services I've shul hopped to have had it, because being on Facebook is too tempting, you know, for observant. For me, there's a slippery slope there. And my kind of compromise is that I'm not typing into chat, but then that means it's not publicly speaking the names of my cholim. And I think you're very right that Zoom is, and some of these technologies are going to feel very primitive to us down the line.
What I want to say, if I can just thank you so much, Chaya. It's really good to see you. I think one of these push-pull experiences that we're having for those of us who don't like to use technology on Shabbat and don't like to type and don't like to write and don't like to use our telephones, we find ourselves to deal with our loneliness, deal with the absence of community. We find ourselves using technology in ways that we haven't before. Come Shabbat, there never used to be a cell phone on my Shabbat table. The phones were all put away. Come Shabbat, we are on Zoom, and the whole family, my daughter in Princeton and her family, one in Providence and her family, that we are all together singing Shalom Aleichem. And my son-in-law says Kiddush. The children are saying Motzi, and then sometimes we'll hang around and chat over dinner together. We would never have done that before. We wouldn't have machinery there, and it feels both wonderful and like totally wrong that there shouldn't be all these machines. And I think it's very possible that our attitudes towards the machines might change. We might think of the machines as appendages to our being. We don't know yet. We just don't know. We're in process. Thank you, Chaya.
Right.
Can we take another one or two questions?
Yeah, we have Deborah's iPad. Go ahead. Can you unmute yourself?
Debbie Kagan from the wilds of Houston, Texas, where our numbers are going up. We're pretty darn sure we're not going to have high holy days together. So we have, Sue Resnick is also part of our group, and we are very much trying to figure out how we're going to do this. One thought I had, Vanessa, as you were speaking, was High Holy Days obviously starts, at the beginning of Elul, or let's say Tisha B'Av, that I hope that people are going to be creating resources that we can study leading up to Rosh Hashanah. And the other thing I wanted to say is that the lack of being able to sing together has been a terrible blow for those of us who love to sing. And I wish somebody would figure out how congregations could sing together on Zoom.
So I have two prayers. This, in second order, is I would like people to be able to sing together on Zoom. Number one, I would like a vaccine for the coronavirus. I would like there to be a vaccine. If that happens, maybe we won't need to have to be able to sing together. But I have a feeling that singing together it's going to come together pretty quickly. I have that feeling that it's not going to be all that difficult. So I'm hoping, maybe not by Rosh Hashanah though. Maybe not by Rosh Hashanah or Sukkot or Simchas Torah. Or how are we going to do Simchas Torah? Oh, well, we've got to figure out Rosh Hashanah first. And we will, because we're creative and we're smart, and everyone's working. We're all working together. One more question?
Well, we have a couple of chats that are kind of related, so I'm going to.
Okay, want to share them all?
From Lauren's iPad, from Deborah's to Lauren's, I've been thinking about the Zoom make our ritual and traditions less formal, and when we lose something, when we could all come back together at shul. And from Ted Merwin, the problem is that we probably won't need so many synagogues, just a few with superstar rabbis and cantors that everybody can tune into.
Ooh. Can you just repeat that first question again?
I've been thinking about the Zoom make our ritual and traditions less formal.
Got it. Okay, so those are, got it, all set. Thanks, John. Formality is very interesting. When we go to synagogue, I don't know about you, but I look better than I usually look. I've got my hair is brushed. I'm not in my yoga costume. I'm not even wearing my school clothes. I have shul clothes and shul shoes, and when I present a different self when I go into shul, and I think that many of us who are entering Jewish events and Jewish learning, and even sometimes Shabbos services, we're not necessarily getting ready to go to this place because we're still in our houses, that we have not entered Matovu Ohalecha Yaakov. I mean, yes, God is everywhere, but God is in our synagogue in a somewhat different way than God is in the laundry room of my house, if that's where the best reception is. So I think we are, on one hand, we are going to lose that formality of prayer space. And on the other hand, for many, it's that very formality of prayer space that makes those places unpleasant for many Jews, or the feeling that you're not going to know the Hebrew well enough and someone is going to see you and you won't know what page you're on. So I have a feeling that being less visible, the fact that you can make your video go away, or that you can just go to a live stream synagogue, allows people to feel a lot safer that they can be themselves and come to these places. As for what Ted was saying, that's a real, hi Ted, I think those are real concerns. Will the small communities be able in this period to have the financial support to sustain themselves when you can Zoom into a synagogue that has a tech staff and fabulous microphones and numerous rabbis and a chorus that has not just a chorus, but they've got a drum and a flute, and it's all electronically connected, and there's great speakers. How can the local folks compete? How can they compete? And I think those are really interesting, provocative questions. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Jewish communities right now are struggling. You know, you've probably read the Federation in New York, the Boston Federation. Many workers have been laid off right now. So there are real issues about how do we sustain Jewish communities. I have a feeling that once my first wish is granted, that there will be an inoculation. I have a feeling that all of our small communities, not all of them, but most of them will be back in business and will be strong once again, because Judaism is local. Judaism is intimate. And yes, we have our stars and they're interesting, but I think our own rabbis and cantors and teachers, they're stars to us because they know us and love us, and they've seen us and our children grow up, and they've seen our deaths and our losses, and they've comforted us. We've been there for them, and so I think those intimate communities will survive.
Okay, Vanessa, do you have energy and time for a couple more, or?
Sure. How about one more?
Okay, so I will just read a couple of chats again. Let's see. So Michelle Kisliuk says, we who teach music know singing together is very, very complicated technologically. And Cheryl Beckerman adds, no need to speak again, but will add that another kind of cheating bonus to the present moment is being able to multitask, setting the table, making salad during Kabbalat Shabbat, etc.
Now, of course, no one has done that. I hate to tell you how much I've been multitasking. I don't want to confess. And yeah, Michelle, you are as a professor of music, as a musician yourself, you know how complicated it is. But I'm still hoping that we'll be able to sing together, or we'll find ways to creatively syncopate together. Yeah.
I just to interject, I'm multitasking right now and making dinner. You can hear maybe the chicken frying in the pan. But you know, we all around the country and around the world, people who make music together live are panicking. You know, we're panicking and still are about what's going to happen to us. And at UVA, we have some technologists, you know, who work with computer music and are at the cutting edge of that. And they're basically telling us that it's like time travel. I mean, if you're not close together physically, you know, geographically, there's going to be a delay no matter what, in terms of doing something live together. If you're closer together geographically, it's much more minimal. So I think what would happen is we'll be
So
in
that
our
means you and I can sing
community
together in
find each other.
Charlottesville?
Maybe,
Well, that will be good. Or else we'll discover, we'll sing in an, what is the word, Michelle? Antiphonal?
Well, yeah. Antiphonal, sure.
Antiphonal, we'll learn to sing Jewish style. We'll do antiphonal Jewish singing, where one person sings and then the next person, the next box sings. We'll figure it out. Hopefully, quickly.
Okay, Lynn, would you like to say something?
Yes, I would so like to thank you, Vanessa, for just a mesmerizing hour. I have just found your deep thought and perspectives on this so helpful as we all think about ways that we are going to move forward. But I feel encouraged by your comments and everyone's comments about our creativity and our ability to chart a new future that will perhaps take advantage of some of the technology that has proved helpful, but still bring us back to our synagogues and community and hugs. So thank you so much. I really look forward to having you here, hoping we can next March before Pesach.
Oh, fingers crossed, Be'ezrat Hashem. And I just want to thank you so much, Lynn and Jonathan and Moshe, for your very gracious and able and kind and creative hosting. And I want to say that my prayers are really with the Princeton Jewish Center as you build your new future together, moving from the loss of your rabbi and the difficulties of the pandemic. I know and believe that you will have beautiful and strong and holy times together as you always have.